When a researcher thinks about Chicago during the Prohibition era, they typically think of Al Capone and organized crime. Researchers from the Louisville and southern Indiana area especially, because Capone often frequented the southern Indiana casinos and had business associates in Louisville. Considering the many times that the prophet mentioned his father and the whiskey stills in his life story accounts, one might even conclude that organized crime in Chicago helped shape the prophet's early life, and to influence his ministry to promote teetotalism. Organized crime was not the only influence in the prophet's life from Chicago, however, at least not directly. The most famous early religious associate for the prophet was converted from a life in Chicago organized crime, a man by the name of E. Howard Cadell. Cadell was an evangelist from the 1920s who would influence many in the Louisville and southern Indiana area, and would eventually influence multiple aspects of the prophet's ministry. Chicago's Levee District was infamous for its brothels, gambling, crime, and seedy locations. It was in this district where Al and Frank Capone started their brothel and gambling house, the Four Deuces. It was at the same district where E. Howard Cadell owned his saloon and gambling house. E. Howard Cadell was a businessman with strong Jeffersonville ties. His mother lived in Utica, not far from the prophet and his family. Cadell owned casinos and slot machines in Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. He was born just north of Louisville in the town of Salem, Indiana. About the time that Al Capone moved from New York to Chicago, however, E. Howard Cadell suddenly got religion and left gambling altogether. He moved his base of operations to Indianapolis, Indiana, and then set out to begin building a religious empire instead of nightlife. Cadell wanted to create a network of churches and began focusing his attention towards Louisville and southern Indiana. When Indiana became a dry state in 1919, Cadell began an evangelistic campaign in Louisville's business district, shortly after Prohibition laws were passed. In January of 1920, Cadell announced that Louisville was chosen for his main tabernacle, and that others were soon coming. Cadell wanted to erect a chain of tabernacles throughout southern Indiana and Kentucky. By June of that same year, Cadell's new tabernacle was built. He became known to the locals as the Tabernacle Man. Cadell's combination of business strategy and religion was highly successful, as was his life story, which he frequently retold. It attracted the attention of big-name evangelists such as Gypsy Smith. Cadell's crime to Christianity story would have been very appealing. I became curious about this conversion, however, and I wondered if this was a normal Christian conversion story. Something about the timeline of E. Howard Cadell's conversion made me curious. I thought about his ties to Jeffersonville and Chicago, which coincided with the time that Charles Branham was producing liquor for Otto Wathen. I thought about his sudden flight from Chicago during mob control. I considered the fortune he accumulated almost overnight and his ambition to establish a chain of Indiana churches. Knowing that Jeffersonville became a battleground between Ku Klux Klan and distilleries, I began to wonder about E. Howard Cadell leaving the saloon business. Was it a clean break, as he claimed, after he got religion? Or did he switch sides during the heat of the battle?